Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel, True Scary Stories. Where are you watching from tonight, and what time is it in your country? Have you shared my channel with your friends yet, or are you keeping these whispers all to yourself? It's dark here too. I can hear the rain, a thick, miserable curtain of it hitting the window, and I can almost taste the ozone in the air, the kind that always precedes, or follows, something truly unnatural. You, listening now, you're pulling up to a place where the asphalt dissolves into mud and gravel, a place the maps forgot decades ago. The Blackwood Motel. And I have to say, looking at that flickering, exhausted vacancy sign through the sheeting rain, it seems like a great place to stay. You've always had such excellent judgment when it comes to choosing accommodations. But seriously, if you think you're getting a complimentary continental breakfast out of this adventure, you are sorely mistaken. You'll be lucky if you don't end up as the main course. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Tell me, where are you and what hour is the clock showing? Let me know in the comments. I love to see how many of us are sacrificing our sleep tonight. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that low, unsettling hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You turn off the ignition, the sudden silence of the truck's engine almost deafening beneath the roar of the downpour. The headlights, still slicing through the gloom, illuminate the derelict parking lot. It's a mess of cracked concrete and weeds that have evolved into small, defiant shrubs. The Blackwood is a single, sad line of low-slung units, architectural misery from the 1950s, all peeling paint and broken promises. Most windows are black, opaque voids reflecting nothing but the misery of the sky. But there it is, the impossible sight. The reason you pulled off the highway hours ago, the light in room 12. It's not a warm, inviting light. It's a sickly, intermittent yellow, the kind of weak, failing incandescent glow that suggests faulty wiring, or more unsettlingly, a deliberate invitation. It flickers with the rhythm of a failing heart. You hesitate, the rain battering the roof of the truck, turning the sound into a percussive, tribal beat. Your hand brushes the door handle, cold, wet metal, and you find yourself wondering what kind of person would check into a motel that looks less occupied than a graveyard. You know, places like this, they always remind me of the old murder hotels, those elaborate purpose-built slaughterhouses designed by men like H.H. Holmes in Chicago, where guests checked in but never checked out, lost in a maze of traps and false walls. It's a real grim slice of history, knowing that structures can be meticulously designed for the sole purpose of discreet human disposal. It makes you realize how little we trust architecture when the lights go out. You finally push the door open, stepping out into the biblical downpour. The instant chill of the rain hitting your face is a shock, and you pull your collar up uselessly. The ground squelches beneath your feet as you head toward the office, a tiny detached structure that looks ready to collapse into itself. Door hangs ajar, greeting you with the groan of rusty hinges, a sound that slices through the rain. Inside, the air is thick with mildew and decay, and everything is coated in a uniform gray dust. The counter is empty, the bell tarnished black. No registration cards, no key rack. Just a single, old-fashioned brass key lying on the counter, dull and heavy, labeled with a chipped plastic tag. 12. It's waiting. It feels like an offering, a small, cold piece of inevitability. You pick it up. It has that specific, metallic chill of something that has been forgotten for decades, only to be handled again. It's almost comforting, though, a simple, tangible object in this sea of rot. You know, there's an old piece of French horror lore about what they call phantom hitchhikers, spirits who appear on lonely roads, often warning drivers of a danger ahead before vanishing into thin air. Sometimes they leave an object behind, something small and intimate, and attempt to anchor themselves to the living world before fading back into the static of the highway. This key, resting here so conveniently, feels like that anchor, or perhaps a lure. Intimate Street 7 date. You shake your head, trying to dismiss the swirling paranoia. A cheap, dry joke surfaces in your mind, the kind of cynical humor that helps you cope with existential dread. Why did the ghost switch motel rooms? Because he needed a change of sheets and bodies. You almost laugh, but the sound feels wrong in the silent, dripping office. Out in the rain again, you walk the short, miserable distance to room 12. The number, crudely painted on the door, is half peeled away. You notice the adjacent doors, 11 and 13, are slightly ajar, suggesting they've been breached by vandals or time, but room 12's door is solidly closed. The light flickering inside seems to pulse, anticipating your arrival. You raise the brass key, insert it into the lock. It fits with an ominous, slick ease and turn. The click is soft, too soft, absorbed instantly by the surrounding quiet. Before you push the door open, you pause. You realize that researchers disagree on whether the phantom decay curve in abandoned buildings is purely environmental, a simple product of water damage and neglect, or if it is accelerated and influenced by psycho-spiritual energy left behind by emotional trauma. Looking at the impossible, clean line of the door of room 12, standing straight while the rest of the motel sags, you wonder which theory applies here. Perhaps the energy in this room is simply too focused to allow for standard decay. You push the door open slowly, the air immediately changing texture. You step across the threshold, and the door swings shut silently behind you, severing your connection to the outside world with a gentle, definite thunk. The light still flickers, but only dimly. Now, breathe. Another joke comes to mind, a nervous tick. What do you call a spooky motel desk clerk? A ghoul tender? Yeah, it's bad. But bad humor is better than screaming, right? The rain still pounds outside. You can hear it. But inside room 12, the sound is somehow muted, distant. It's like the room itself is wearing headphones. That sense of isolation is instantaneous, profound. You are here, and the world has been politely asked to wait outside. The last dry joke of this section, just to settle the nerves. I told my wife I needed a break from the stressful monotony of life, so I'm moving into an abandoned motel. She said, "Are you kidding? That's going to be a real dead end." You look around, taking in the scene. The room is tiny, just a square box of peeling wallpaper and two central pieces of furniture. One is the twin bed, covered in what looks like a mountain of pale dust. The other is the desk. And that is where your attention settles, because while the rest of the room looks like the inside of a forgotten tomb, that desk is the focal point of all that is wrong. It is waiting for you. You shiver, but it's not from the damp clothes. The room is impossibly cold, not the ambient, predictable cold of a window left open, but a specific, bone-deep chill that originates somewhere beyond temperature. It feels manufactured. The air is heavy, almost viscous, and carries that sharp, metallic tang of ozone, a scent that lingers after a lightning strike or after something large has passed through the static field of reality. You are standing in the middle of room 12, and the rain, which moments ago was a deafening drumbeat, is now nothing more than a faint, rhythmic susurrus, a soft whisper against the window pane. The room has swallowed the sound whole, leaving you suspended in an unnatural silence. You run a hand over the dust-covered dresser. The grit is fine, powdery, the color of old bone. It adheres to your skin instantly, a chalky film of long stagnant air. The silence is the worst part. It feels deliberate, as if the room is holding its breath. The cold is a constant pressure, pressing in from all sides, and you can see your own breath feathering slightly in the still air. It reminds you of one of the most chilling mainstream facts in supernatural lore, the significant temperature drop often reported by witnesses before, during, or after a haunting. This phenomenon, sometimes called a cold spot, is hypothesized to be the energy required for the manifestation of a spiritual entity, literally pulling thermal energy from the immediate environment. If that is the case, room 12 is hemorrhaging warmth, or perhaps it is actively hoarding it elsewhere. You try to move, to shake off the unsettling stillness, but your feet feel heavy, stuck to the matted, threadbare carpet. You notice the faint, almost sweet odor of old cigarettes layered beneath the ozone and decay. They must have been smoked here decades ago, but the smell persists, a ghostly tobacco stain in the air. This place is an archive of bad habits and worse luck. You force yourself to move toward the wall switch, flipping it uselessly. Nothing. The single flickering light bulb you saw from the outside must have been battery-powered or connected to some forgotten, isolated circuit, or perhaps it was never connected to power at all, but was instead an optical trick designed to draw you in. You look at the bed. It's a sad relic, the mattress sagging severely in the center, a permanent depression suggesting someone spent a great deal of time, and perhaps their final moments right there. The dust on the sheets is undisturbed, a pristine, pale blanket. This confirms that nothing living has slept here for decades. Yet, the air is thick with ozone and old smoke. It's contradictory, a paradox held together by the cold. Now, a bit of obscure horror lore. just to ground us in the strange. Have you ever heard of the doppelganger effect in abandoned places? It's the superstition that if you see a shadow or a reflection that clearly mimics your movements in a deserted building but is somehow distorted or slightly out of sync, it means the building is actively trying to copy and replace your essence, preparing to absorb you into its history. It's why you hesitate to look too closely at the greasy mirror above the sink. You keep your eyes averted, focusing instead on the peeling paint. It's safer to focus on predictable decay. You try a bit of that dark, necessary humor again, flexing the muscle of cynical wit against the oppressive atmosphere. What did the motel guests say when they saw a ghost polishing the sink? Well, that's certainly a spirit-ed cleaning job. The silence of the room absorbs it instantly, making the joke feel like a failure, a small, sad echo. You move past the bed to the window, peering out at the storm. The glass is incredibly thick and streaked with grime. You can barely make out the dark, swaying shapes of the scrubby trees in the distance. When you press your forehead lightly against the pane, the glass is startlingly frigid, colder than the air inside the room. This makes no logical sense. The outside world should be warmer than this interior freezer. You are struck by another thought. Researchers disagree on whether the primary cause of urban legend proliferation is collective cultural anxiety projected onto a narrative framework, or if the legends themselves are a form of psychological precognitive mapping, preparing communities for genuine, low-probability existential threats. Standing here in a room that seems to exist outside of natural law, you lean heavily toward the latter. This room feels like an ancient map, carefully drawn to lead you to one specific, terrifying destination. The heavy, cold atmosphere makes you want to crawl under the covers, but the sight of the undisturbed dust is a powerful deterrent. You notice a small, dried-out moth, utterly perfect in its desiccation, resting on the windowsill. It must have died here years ago, but it looks less like a victim of age and more like a specimen prepared for a display case. A second dry joke, because the silence is demanding something. Why did the ghost get kicked out of the Blackwood Motel? Because he kept giving the other guests a sheet show. See, it's still terrible. Good. You finally turn your full attention to the writing desk. It's an old piece, heavy oak, or possibly walnut, dark and imposing. It contrasts sharply with the cheap, institutional feel of the rest of the room. It's the single object that belongs somewhere else, perhaps in a dusty library or a professor's study. The desk is the anchor of this room, and unlike everything else, it is, surprisingly, clean. Not spotless, but the dust here is only a light film, suggesting that either someone has been using it recently, or that the supernatural influence responsible for the cold spot is emanating directly from the desk itself, creating a small, localized zone of temporal protection. You approach it slowly, almost reverently. It feels like entering a church, if the church were dedicated to quiet, inevitable despair. You run a finger across the polished surface, only a faint trace of dust. The rest of the room looks like it hasn't been disturbed since the 1970s. This desk is different. This desk is active. One last piece of dark humor before the next step. I tried to have a normal vacation, but the motel staff insisted I take a complimentary wake-up call. I said, great. They said, it's a call from the other side, and they never hang up. You reach out, your fingers hovering over the single, shallow central drawer. The cold is focused here, radiating from the wood itself. You are about to touch the thing that defies the dust, the thing that drew you across a storm-swept highway to a forgotten, silent box of a room. You take a deep breath of the ozone-tinged air. The desk waits patiently. The desk, it's an anomaly, a breach in the consistent narrative of decay that defines the rest of room 12. You stand over it, the heavy, dark wood imposing against the peeling floral wallpaper. The scent of aged wood polish and something sharp, almost metallic like lemon rind, emanates from it. A strange, almost pleasant aroma competing with the underlying stale cigarette smoke and ozone. You extend a cautious hand, the fingertips lightly grazing the desktop. The surface is smooth, cool to the touch, and coated only in a fine, almost translucent layer of pale dust. Nothing like the thick, matte shroud covering the bed and the dresser. This desk has been tended, or perhaps it has simply refused to succumb. You lean closer, your breath stirring the minimal dust, and you see faint, almost invisible patterns etched into the dark finish. Not vandalism, but repetitive, small indentations, the pressure points of decades of hurried writing. Someone, or something, used this desk regularly, right up until the point where the motel itself ceased to exist in any conventional sense. It reminds you of a mainstream psychological horror fact, the concept of place memory or residual haunting, where intense emotional energy or trauma becomes imprinted on the physical environment. The desk, being the tool and surface for contemplation, might be the most receptive conductor of this residual energy, the focal point where the past is most acutely present. It's where the thinking happened, where the planning took place, or where the final message was written. You trace the outline of the main drawer. It has a tiny, tarnished brass pull, simple and functional. There are no other visible drawers, only a solid wood panel beneath the main desktop. You try the pull, expecting resistance, or maybe the creak of old wood seizing up. Instead, it slides open with a whisper-soft glide, the smooth movement entirely out of place in this environment. The interior of the drawer is lined with a dark, frayed felt, stained with the ghost image of long-gone objects. It smells faintly of paper and old adhesive. You look into the dark recess. It's mostly empty. A few desiccated wood lice curled into perfect brown rings lie in the corner. A single dull pencil stub, the eraser chewed down to the metal ferrule, rests near the back, and then your eyes lock onto the object that defies the dust, the object that seems to pull the very cold from the room and focus it into a singular point. The letter. A piece of fringe horror lore floats into your mind as you stare at the drawer. They say that when certain objects are left intentionally in a cursed place, not just forgotten but placed, they become conduits for whatever malevolent force occupies the space. This is often linked to the concept of a spirit anchor, where an item acts as a bridge, allowing an entity to interact with or lure someone from the living world. This letter, lying there so conspicuously, doesn't feel like a forgotten relic. It feels like bait. You hesitate for a moment, admiring the craftsmanship of the desk. It's genuinely well made. You think of a dry joke. Why don't ghosts ever use their full vacation time? Because they're always worried about missing a good scare opportunity. The silence of room 12 eats the punchline alive. You reach for the drawer's interior, your fingers brushing against the fragile felt lining. You notice the lining feels oddly thick, almost doubled, but dismiss it as old age and moisture damage. The only thing that matters now is the heavy object lying centered in the felt. You recall the concept of historical interpretation, recognizing the inherent bias in any recovered artifact. Historians still argue whether the apparent intentionality of objects left behind at historical crime scenes is a deliberate communication from the perpetrator to the outside world, or merely an over-interpretation of mundane detritus by subsequent investigators seeking narrative closure. With this letter sealed and waiting, you have to wonder if it's a message or just a piece of trash that time decided to preserve. The fact that the drawer opens so smoothly, almost invitingly, makes the intentional communication theory very compelling. You pull your hand back suddenly, a brief, irrational flicker of fear hitting you. Why the hesitation? It's just a letter, it's paper and wax, but everything in this room is screaming at you that nothing is just anything. Another piece of dark humor to steady the hand. What do you call a motel with a high turnover rate of guests and their spirits? A revolving tomb. You lean back slightly, allowing your eyes to wander across the rest of the room, confirming the persistent cold and the thick dust on the bed. That dust is the silent witness to the years that have passed, and the desk is the liar, the outlier, the one that tells the story of time not past. You consider the possible outcomes of touching the letter. What if it's a trigger? What if the moment your hand closes around the cream-colored envelope, the soundproofing of room 12 dissolves, and the rain outside stops, replaced by something much worse? This is the kind of pointless speculation that always precedes the inevitable commitment. You know you have to pick it up. Final dark joke for this section. My doctor told me I was suffering from chronic insomnia. I said, "Tell me about it. I've been dead tired for years." You focus your gaze back on the drawer. The heavy paper, the way the light seems to catch the faint sheen of the envelope, turning it from cream to a pale, ominous gold. You slide your hand into the drawer and wrap your fingers around the letter. It is heavier than it looks, substantial, almost like there's a small flat stone sealed inside. The paper is thick, premium quality, entirely inconsistent with a derelict roadside motel. The act of touching it sends a familiar yet unwelcome surge of coldness up your arm, far colder than the key you picked up earlier. It's a purposeful, communicating cold. You pull the letter free, the felt beneath it shifts slightly, confirming the lining is indeed looser than it should be. But you are focused now on the weight in your hand. The sealed mystery that brought you into this unnatural silence. The letter is in your hands, resting heavily against your palm. It's an antique, cream-colored envelope, thick and stiff, the kind of quality paper that hasn't been commercially available for decades. It feels less like correspondence and more like a carefully crafted vessel. The edges are crisp, unfrayed, despite the motel's general state of decomposition. It possesses a weight that belies its size, suggesting not just thick paper, but something dense pressed inside. Maybe a series of folded sheets, or, as you suspected, something metallic or stone-like, flat and heavy. Your eyes are drawn immediately to the seal. It's not an address or a stamp that commands attention, but the wax. Black, deep, obsidian black wax, carefully dripped and then pressed with an unfamiliar archaic symbol. The symbol is a stark geometric shape, a triangle nested within a broken circle, with 3 tiny, equally spaced dots suspended between the circle and the triangle's outer edge. It looks less like a family crest and more like a stylized alchemical diagram or an attempt to render a constellation that simply doesn't exist. The black wax itself is unsettlingly smooth, resistant to the light. It doesn't look brittle, it looks fresh, or perhaps preserved by the specific cold of room 12. You turn the envelope over, searching for recipient or return address. Nothing. The surface is blank, except for the slight textural difference where the paper grain runs horizontally across the cream sheet. It is an unopened letter intended for no one, or perhaps intended for the first person foolish enough to find it, which is of course you. You realize that finding an object in this state is not a passive event, it's an invitation to a secret history. This is often the core mechanism of mainstream horror narratives, the discovery of the forbidden text, the sealed box, the diary that should have remained buried. It's the moment the protagonist willingly accepts the burden of an unfolding, dangerous truth. Congratulations, you've just accepted the main role in this evening's performance. I hope you remembered your lines. You hold the letter up to the weak, flickering light, trying to discern the contents through the thick paper. You see only the heavy shadow of the internal mass. It's completely opaque. The symbol on the black wax seems to absorb the light, leaving a small dead spot of nothingness in your field of vision. It brings to mind a particularly obscure tidbit of ghost lore known as the silent seal tradition. In some rural European superstitions, a letter sealed with black wax was believed to contain not ink and paper, but a physical fragment of a curse, a bound demon, or a secret so vile it was deemed unreadable by the light of day. The act of breaking the seal was considered a spiritual breach, releasing whatever had been contained back into the atmosphere. The heavy weight of the letter in your hand seems to confirm this physical content theory. You try to make a joke, needing to puncture the growing dread with a sharp, cynical jab. Why did the delivery guy refuse to touch the black wax sealed letter? Because he heard the contents were a little too binding. Would his stares and a caress the mated? The joke lands flat, just a collection of syllables suspended in the cold, ozone-scented air. You rub the back of your neck. The cold emanating from the letter is intense now, making your fingers ache slightly. You place the letter carefully on the desk, not wanting to disturb the pristine black wax. It rests there, a dark punctuation mark on the smooth, polished wood. You lean back, considering the logistics. Why here? Why room 12? Why the preservation? You remember the scholarly debate phrasing. Historians still argue whether the consistent use of unique, quasi-Masonic symbols in historical documents recovered from abandoned places indicates a coordinated secret society, or if it is merely the product of isolated individuals seeking to imbue their personal neuroses with a manufactured ritualistic significance. That archaic symbol on the wax seal definitely falls into this category. It feels both deeply personal and vaguely ritualistic. You trace the symbol in the air above the seal, triangle, broken circle, 3 dots. It feels like an ancient warning. The temptation to open it is immense, a purely human curiosity that has driven half of history's greatest mistakes. Another piece of dry, dark wit bubbles up. Why was the abandoned motel's library so popular? Because it specialized in dead languages. You crack a weak smile. Better, you find yourself pacing the tiny perimeter of the room. 2 steps to the window, 2 steps to the door. The sound of your shoes on the carpet is muffled, like walking through deep water. You stop at the window, peering out into the torrential rain. The light in the office is gone now, only darkness where the brass key lay waiting for you. You are truly alone, encapsulated in this cold, strangely preserved box. As you turn back toward the desk, you see the letter again, the black seal glowing faintly under the dim flickering bulb. It seems to beckon. The silence of the room seems to concentrate on the single action you are about to take. A final cynical thought before the commitment. I went to a party for hermits once. It was awful. Nobody showed up. At least here. In this abandoned room with a cursed letter, the attendance is perfect. Just you and the gathering dread. You walk back to the desk. You pick up the letter again, holding it with both hands, feeling the combined weight of the thick paper and whatever dense object is sealed inside. You bring it closer to your face, trying to catch any faint scent other than the wood polish and ozone. And then you catch it, a smell that immediately cuts through the other odors, a scent that is so specific, so cold, and so utterly wrong. It's the smell of iron and ink, and something else, something deeply disturbing. You hold the heavy, sealed envelope inches from your face, and the combination of scents hits you like a cold, wet cloth. The initial, faint metallic scent you noticed earlier is now sharply defined. Iron. It's the coppery, unmistakable smell of old, dried blood mixed with the acrid, earthy aroma of deep black ink. The kind of ink that stains skin and resists fading for centuries. The blend is chilling, primal, and entirely too specific to be a coincidence. It's the scent of violence and inscription, of something permanent being recorded through physical pain. As you inhale this unsettling bouquet, you hear it, a sound so faint, so delicate. You almost mistake it for the static in your own ear. It's a soft, persistent scratching. It is a focused, rhythmic sound, like fingernails or a sharpened tool being dragged repeatedly across a hard, rough surface. It is painful in its insistent rhythm, cutting through the blanket of silence the room has imposed. You freeze, the letter held motionless in your hands. You realize immediately the sound is not coming from the desk or the bed, or even the window where the rain whispers. It is coming from the wall, specifically the solid, plaster-covered wall section directly opposite the desk. That wall is empty, bearing only the faded pattern of the hideous floral wallpaper, yet the sound is undeniably originating from within its structure. Scratch. Pause. Scratch. Pause. Scratch. The classic sound from the walls, suggesting something trapped, something alive, or something ceaselessly working its way toward freedom. It's the physical manifestation of the paranoia you feel that you are not alone, and that whatever is here is not passive. It's busy. You slowly turn your head toward the wall, trying not to make a sound that might interrupt the source of the scratching. The light bulb flickers again, intensely this time, casting quick, unsettling shadows that momentarily turn the floral pattern into faces and gaping mouths. The scratching continues, steady, relentless. You think of an obscure horror tidbit related to this. In some old folklore of haunted architecture, the continuous, inexplicable sound of scratching within the walls of a building is attributed to a wound writer, an entity tasked with perpetually inscribing the location's original trauma onto its very fabric. The entity is often believed to use the victim's own bones or teeth as its writing tool, hence the abrasive, painful sound. If that is true, whatever is behind that wall is not just marking time, it is documenting a historical atrocity within the motel's very framework. The realization prompts a joke, a reflex of self-defense against the terror. Why was the wound writer so bad at its job? Because it kept screwing up the historical record. The forced laughter is caught in your throat, a dry, rasping sound. You take 2 steps toward the wall, then stop. The iron smell of the letter intensifies as you move away from the desk. It's clear that the letter, the scent, and the scratching are all parts of the same connected trap. You realize with chilling certainty that you must examine the wall. But first, the letter. You turn back to the desk, placing the letter down just long enough to collect your thoughts. You try to rationalize the sound. Maybe it's a pipe, but the sound is dry, non-metallic, clearly abrasive against wood or plaster. You recall the scholarly debate phrasing. Researchers disagree on whether the human ability to instantly identify and locate the source of faint, non-organic sounds in absolute silence is a vestigial evolutionary trait designed to identify predators, or a psychoacoustic manifestation of escalating stress and isolation. Either way, your brain is telling you that the sound is real, and it is right there. Another joke, delivered with a shaky sigh. What's a ghost's favorite TV show? The Walking Dead, because it's a real spirit lifter. Useless. You pick up the letter again, the black seal calling to you. The impulse to open it is now intertwined with the need to understand the scratching. The message inside might explain what is trapped, or who. The heavy weight in the envelope feels like a solid, silent counterpoint to the sharp, insistent sound from the wall. You hold the letter up one last time, admiring the chilling perfection of the black wax seal. You need to break it to release whatever is bound inside, both physically and symbolically. You know the act will intensify everything, the cold, the smell, and perhaps the scratching. It's the only way forward. Final piece of morbid humor before the plunge. My therapist told me I should start a new hobby to deal with my anxiety. So I started collecting forgotten souls. It's very consuming. You take a final, deep, ozone-scented breath. You use your thumb carefully positioned beneath the bottom edge of the wax seal. You don't want to rip the thick paper, you want to make a clean, definite break. You press gently, feeling the brittle resistance of the ancient wax. The scratching from the wall suddenly becomes frantic, a quick, desperate flurry of abrasive sound, as if the wound writer knows exactly what you are about to do, when it's trying to finish its sentence before you can read it. You ignore the surge of fear, focusing only on the pressure of your thumb, the moment of commitment. The black wax is about to shatter, but you stop. Just as the seal is about to crack, you hesitate. You need to know more about the place you've entered. The letter might explain the present, but the motel's history might explain the letter. Before you unlock the final secret, you need the context of the Blackwood Motel. You lower the letter, sealed intact, and turn to the window, peering into the storm, trying to recall the whispered local lore. The black-sealed letter rests momentarily on the desk, its ominous weight pressing into the polished wood. The faint, incessant scratching from the empty wall is a constant reminder that something is waiting, but you know you need to understand the foundation of this dread first. Why this motel? Why room 12? Why the overwhelming, unnatural cold? You look past the grime on the window, through the sheeting rain, and try to pull the scattered threads of local legend together. You recall the whispered lore about the Blackwood Motel. It wasn't built in a particularly unlucky spot, but rather, it earned its reputation through a series of inexplicable events that began almost immediately after its opening in the late 1960s. The mainstream fact that dominates the Blackwood's history isn't a single murder, but the pattern of the disappearances. Travelers, almost always single people passing through during the autumn and winter months, would check in, and by morning their luggage, cars, and sometimes even their dogs would be gone. No broken windows, no signs of struggle, just a perfect, clean vacancy. The local police initially dismissed them as runaways, but the sheer Volume 5 documented cases over 4 years was impossible to ignore. It was too efficient, too sterile. The disappearances created a perfect void, fueling the local belief that the Blackwood wasn't a stop along the journey, but the final, silent destination itself. The end of the motel's operational life was marked by a suspicious, devastating fire in 1974. It wasn't arson, or at least no evidence of accelerants was ever found. The fire simply started in the central administrative office and consumed the registration records in the manager's apartment, leaving the individual units mostly intact but heavily smoke-damaged, and then abandoned. It feels less like a tragic accident and more like a deliberate act of deletion, erasing the evidence of the vanishing guests. You try to piece together the narrative. The vanishings, the suspicious fire, the persistent, unnatural cold, and now, the scratch on the wall and the letter heavy with the smell of iron and ink. It sounds like a ghost story written by an accountant. This leads you to a piece of obscure folklore, often associated with abandoned places near old mining routes or forgotten settlements, the legend of the caretaker's silence. The belief is that a powerful, non-human entity sometimes takes possession of a structure that has witnessed repeated trauma or death. This entity doesn't actively hurt the living, but instead enforces a state of absolute oppressive silence and immobility within its walls, acting as a curator of the suffering. The entity's primary goal is to preserve the trauma, and anyone who disturbs the silence, by screaming, by trying to leave, or by opening a sealed letter, is immediately added to the collection. The unnatural muting of the rain outside and the room's impossible cold feel precisely like this enforced, curated silence. You manage a dry, unsettling joke. The Blackwood Motel's motto used to be, "You can check out any time you like, but your car stays in the lot forever." No, wait, that's not funny. That's actually just terrifying. You turn back to the letter, you're resolved to open it now, firmer. If the Blackwood is actively preserving a history of trauma, this letter, sealed and waiting in the clean desk, is the key to that preservation, or perhaps the story of someone who tried to break the silence. The scholarly debate phrasing pops into your head again. Researchers disagree on whether the cessation of police investigation into the 1974 Blackwood Motel fire was due to lack of forensic evidence or a coordinated decision by local authorities to suppress a case that was rapidly moving into the realm of the paranormal and thereby preserve community stability. You certainly feel the oppressive weight of a cover-up in this room. You step away from the desk and walk slowly around the room one more time, testing the silence with the sound of your movements. You look at the heavy door, the one that clicked so definitively behind you. You try the handle. It's locked, of course. The single brass key is sitting on the bedside table. You pick it up. It is cold, inert. It let you in, but you realize now that it might never let you out. A second morbid joke to distract the scratching entity behind the wall. What's the difference between a good night's sleep and a night at the Blackwood Motel? At least a good night's sleep eventually ends. You run your hand along the wallpaper again, tracing the dark, abrasive patch where the scratching is coming from. The wall feels oddly thin here, almost brittle beneath the decades of paint and paper. The sound is still there. Scratch. Scratch. It's trying to write its way out of the trauma archive. You need to know what message the wound writer is inscribing, but first, you must know what the silent seal contains. You make a final cynical, dark joke, almost a personal plea to the abyss. I told my wife I was going to write a novel about my experience in this abandoned motel. She said, "Don't bother, nobody reads fiction about being painfully, existentially alone anymore." Too real, perhaps. You return to the desk. The letter is waiting, its black wax seal intact, a perfect circle of stored kinetic energy. The iron smell of the ink and the ozone are now dominant. The scratching intensifies again, as if in protest, a nervous tick of the room's hidden mechanism. Your fingers are cold, steady. This is the moment. You pick up the letter, hold it flat, and position your thumb over the seal. You are about to break the caretaker's silence. You don't hesitate this time. You know the act of opening the letter is the commitment you came here for. You position the thick envelope carefully, holding it against the polished dark wood of the desk. The black wax seal with its alien symbol, the triangle within the broken circle, is rigid beneath your thumb. You exert slow, deliberate pressure, focusing not on the fear, but on the satisfying friction of the inevitable break. The second the wax yields, the sound is surprisingly small, a dry, sharp snap, like a twig breaking under a heavy shoe. A wisp of something intangible seems to dissipate from the broken seal, and the oppressive cold of room 12 instantly drops several degrees, hitting you like an icy physical wave. It's a profound, immediate chill, forcing a sharp gasp of ozone-scented air from your lungs. Simultaneously, a sharp pulse of static electricity runs up your arm, starting at the point of contact on the seal and shooting into your shoulder, leaving your skin tingling and faintly numb. This is the moment of the mainstream horror fact. The breach of the seal has released a focused, contained energy, confirming the seal was indeed a spiritual lock. The scratching from the empty wall abruptly stops. The silence that follows is even heavier than before, an expectant, absolute void that presses on your eardrums. The wound writer has paused its inscription to listen. You ignore the aching cold in your fingers and peel the shattered fragments of the black wax from the envelope's flap. The heavy paper beneath the seal is stained black, but not with ink. It's saturated with something dry and powdery, the residual carbon of whatever was used to make the seal so dark and permanent. You realize the dense weight you felt in the envelope was not just the contents, but the rigidity of the paper itself, a premium museum-grade stock chosen specifically for its permanence. You reach into the envelope, your fingers brushing against the single folded sheet inside. It's a coarse, almost fabric-like paper, rough against your skin. You pull it out, the movement surprisingly difficult, as if the paper is reluctant to leave its shell. And the envelope immediately becomes lighter, its unnatural weight entirely gone, leaving it feeling like any other piece of discarded stationery. The density was indeed in the paper inside. You unfold the single sheet. It's large, covering the surface of the desk. The paper is brittle, almost dusty, and smells distinctly of the iron blood and deep black ink you sensed earlier. And then you see the script. It's handwritten, looping, precise, and completely, utterly wrong. The letters themselves are standard English characters, but they are arranged in an impossible, mirrored fashion. The handwriting flows from right to left, and every single letter is reversed, perfectly legible if you were to hold a mirror up to the page, but an indecipherable jumble of looping, backward characters to the naked eye. It's a mirror script, meticulously executed, covering the entire surface of the page. This reminds you of a particularly obscure piece of fringe lore, the symmetry of lies. This superstition claims that true, malevolent intent cannot be recorded directly, as the universe has an inherent aversion to pure evil. Therefore, powerful curses or hidden truths must be written in reverse or mirror script to trick reality into accepting them. The script is only readable when reflected, because a mirror is a tool that reverses perspective, a necessary visual trick to expose the hidden truth. You try to make sense of the backward flow, but it just causes a slight, frustrating headache. You need a mirror. The only mirror in the room is the grimy, small rectangle above the sink in the bathroom. The thought of moving away from the relative safety of the desk and the dim light is unwelcome but necessary. You hold the letter up, angling it slightly in the dim, flickering bulb. You recall the scholarly debate phrasing. Historians still argue whether the prevalence of mirror script in certain recovered historical artifacts indicates an attempt at cryptographic secrecy intended only for a closed circle of initiated readers, or if the deliberate act of writing backward is a documented psychological symptom of deep-seated trauma or psychosis. Looking at the flawless execution of the script, you suspect it is both. It's a symptom of madness, carefully encoded. A dark joke escapes your lips, a nervous release. What did the abandoned motel's librarians say when they found a book written backward? Well, this is a bit too reflective for my taste. You carefully fold the letter, placing it back on the desk. You need to use the mirror. You force yourself to walk toward the small, dark alcove that serves as the bathroom. The cold follows you, a silent, heavy coat. The bathroom is even smaller than you expected, dominated by a tiny, rusted sink and the aforementioned mirror. The mirror is a disappointment. It's so covered in grime and water spots that it's nearly opaque, reflecting nothing clearly. You quickly dampen a tissue from your pocket and wipe a small central section clean. The reflection that stares back is pale, strained, and immediately unsettling. The cold is much worse here. You return to the desk, grab the letter, and head back to the mirror, holding the rough paper up to the newly cleaned surface. You angle the paper, seeking the perfect reflection. And then it works. The mirrored surface flips the script, and the looping, backwards handwriting snaps into perfect, legible English. The text is dense, precise, and utterly terrifying. A second dry, dark joke whispered to your reflection. I asked the motel's manager if they had a good view. He said, "The view of your impending doom is spectacular." The text starts with a date, exactly 50 years ago, and a chilling opening line, "I can no longer trust the ceiling." You need to read the whole thing, but your eyes dart immediately to the final, most crucial element, a specific name and a set of coordinates. Final morbid joke, a concession to the impending truth. What's the difference between a secret and the truth revealed in a mirror script? One keeps you safe, the other gives you the coordinates to your own grave. You focus on the reverse text, the name standing out starkly against the desperate prose. The letter is a confession, a warning, and a map. The mirror script is perfectly legible now, flipped into terrifying clarity on the grimy glass. The handwritten message is a dense, desperate confession, beginning with that chilling date, precisely 5 decades in the past. And the opener, "I can no longer trust the ceiling." You ignore the bulk of the agonizing prose for a moment, letting your eyes jump to the final critical information, a specific name and a set of geographical coordinates. The name is bolded by its sheer specificity, Elias. It's a good, solid, old-fashioned name, completely at odds with the frantic terror of the surrounding text. The coordinates are a string of numbers, seemingly random, placed precisely beneath the name. You memorize them instantly, knowing they're the key to unlocking the true physical dimension of this nightmare. Now you force yourself to read the body of the text, holding the paper steady against the wall beneath the mirror. The writing is frantic, detailing a slow, creeping realization that the writer, Elias, was trapped. He writes of the motel's silence, the ozone smell, and the pervasive cold, exactly as you have experienced them. He describes the walls seeming to breathe, the lights flickering only when he was close to the door, and the disturbing way the dust would stop accumulating around objects he touched, preserving them from the flow of time. He was, in effect, quarantined. This mirror script, revealing the truth only in reversal, perfectly encapsulates the mainstream fact of the Mandela effect in a personal context, the feeling that one's memories or reality have been subtly, yet fundamentally, altered, and that the truth is only visible when viewed from an impossible, reversed perspective. Elias felt his reality was being reversed, and thus he wrote his truth in reverse. You pause, letting the despair of Elias's fate sink in. He wasn't just trapped by the storm, he was trapped by the building itself. As you stand there, reflecting on Elias's escalating paranoia, a piece of obscure folklore comes to mind, the concept of spatial dissonance in abandoned structures. This tidbit suggests that a building doesn't need to be structurally sound to exert influence. It needs only to exist as a persistent idea. When an inhabitant mentally accepts the building's supernatural rules, the cold, the silence, the stagnation, the building reciprocates by allowing the inhabitant to see its true, non-Euclidean reality, often symbolized by mirror images or inverted logic. Elias was a victim of this spatial dissonance, forced to adopt its inverse logic just to communicate. You try a quick, nervous joke, breaking the tension. What did the paranoid motel guest say to the ceiling? I'm not looking up, but I know you're watching me write this backwards. You finish reading the message. Elias was writing to someone, a desperate plea to an unknown recipient to use the coordinates and find what he left behind, hidden in the room. He says that the paper itself is the key and the coordinates are the lock. The message ends with a simple, crushing final line. They've moved the door again. I am room 12 now. You slowly lower the letter, pulling it away from the mirror. It reverts back to the looping, indecipherable tangle of backward letters, the secret safely hidden from the light. The wall is still silent. The scratching has not resumed. You return to the desk, placing the letter face up. You need to verify Elias's existence. Was he one of the vanished travelers? NIDA. You recall the scholarly debate phrasing. Researchers disagree on whether the most effective method for solving historical disappearances is through digital cross-referencing of archived police reports, or through the careful tactile examination of residual documents and artifacts left at the scene, which often contain crucial, non-official information. Since the official records were burned in the fire, you have to choose the latter. You search the desk drawers again, running your hands along the inner walls. You find nothing else except for the fragile felt lining. Remembering the thickness you noticed earlier, you carefully use your fingernail to lift the edge of the felt. It peels away easily, revealing the raw wood beneath. The wood is pale, unstained, completely unlike the dark oak of the rest of the desk. And there it is, tucked into the shallow space beneath the felt, a brittle, yellowed, half-burnt ledger. It's the remains of the 1970s Blackwood Motel guest register. A second joke, dry and dark. I asked the owner of the deserted motel if the register was haunted. He said, I don't know, but the last guest who signed it just paid with a Spirit credit card. You open the ledger with extreme care. The first pages are smoke-damaged and illegible, but deep in the interior. Protected by the fold, the paper is merely brittle. You scan the names handwritten in fading ballpoint pen. There are entries for couples, salesmen, and families, all mundane. And then, near an entry dated exactly 50 years ago, 2 weeks before Elias's letter was written, you find it. Name, Elias B. Thorn Room, 12 arrival, date matching departure, B. Alank, signed in faint, spidery script. Left suddenly. Checkout pending. He was real. He was here, and his departure was noted as pending by a manager who clearly didn't understand the nature of the checkout process in room 12. The final joke of the section, aimed at the tragedy of the situation. What do you call a motel guest who never leaves? A permanent resident of the dedication room. You close the register, the confirmation heavy in your lap. Elias, the writer of the mirror script, the man who could no longer trust the ceiling, never left. He is still here somehow, and he left behind coordinates, and he mentioned something hidden in the room. You look up from the register, your eyes drawn to the only other major piece of furniture in the room, the small, dark, built-in closet door near the foot of the bed. It's locked. The discovery of the guest register remnant, confirming Elias V. Thorne's stay in room 12 precisely 5 decades ago, solidifies the reality of the mirror script letter. He was one of the vanished, but unlike the others, he left a meticulous, horrifying record. You push the brittle register fragment aside, focusing on the coordinates, a string of 8 precise digits, and the specific physical reality they represent. You know the coordinates are the key, but they point to a location outside the room, a place where Elias wanted his final message found. You quickly realize you don't have a map or a compass, and your phone has been inert static since you entered the motel lot. You are forced to rely on your memory and a visual approximation of the directions the numbers suggest. The numbers imply a location not far from the Blackwood, perhaps a clearing, or a specific marked tree line near the abandoned access road. This reliance on fragmented knowledge in a hostile environment is a classic component of mainstream survival horror, where the protagonist must navigate not just monsters, but the fundamental unreliability of technology and memory. You turn your attention back to the room. Elias stated in the letter that the paper itself was the key and that what he left was hidden in the room. The coordinates then must direct the finder to the meaning of the hidden object, not the object itself. You look at the small, dark closet door again. It's the logical final destination. It sits low and narrow, almost blending into the wall, a deep mahogany color that contrasts with the pale wallpaper. Its handle is a simple heavy brass knob with a visible keyhole, and you know with absolute certainty that the small brass key you found on the counter was for the main door, and this closet requires a different, separate lock. It feels like a lock designed to keep something in rather than out. A piece of obscure architectural horror lore comes to mind, the dead closet principle. This idea holds that older, forgotten buildings, particularly those constructed with an inherent psychological flaw, like this motel's efficient disappearance rate, will often contain one closet or alcove that actively functions as a negative space, a physical extension of the structure's malice. Anything placed in the dead closet loses its material integrity over time, eventually being absorbed into the wall, becoming part of the structure's trauma. The door, therefore, is locked to prevent the structure from collapsing inward. You stand before the closet, peering into the gloom. The faint, high-pitched ringing in your ears seems to amplify here, near the dark wood. You try to dispel the tension with a dry joke. I asked the closet door if it was hiding any skeletons. It said no, just a couple of unfortunate guests who decided to hang around. You reach out and touch the knob. It's cold, much colder than the brass key you used for the main door. You try to turn it, but the lock is solid, immovable. You shake the door gently, nothing. It is sealed with decades of silence and immobility. As you contemplate how to break into the closet, your mind drifts to the historical narrative. Researchers disagree on whether the pervasive anxiety expressed in mid-20th century American horror fiction regarding the hidden spaces in homes and motels, closets, attics, basements, is a subconscious societal fear of institutional abuse, or a direct cultural callback to earlier European superstitions regarding contained supernatural entities. This Blackwood motel seems to be arguing for the latter. The closet feels like a medieval box, containing a specific active malevolence. You lean your ear against the closet door, and the silence is suddenly and violently interrupted. It's the scratching. It's back, and it's not faint this time. It is loud, abrasive, and undeniable. It is coming from inside the wooden structure of the closet door itself, or immediately behind it. It's a furious, concentrated sound, no longer a soft rhythm, but a rapid, desperate scritch, 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 as if something with sharp, metallic claws is trying to tear its way through the mahogany. The sound is so visceral, so immediately present that you recoil, taking a stumbling step back toward the desk. The cold is overwhelming, washing over you in waves. You can almost smell the wood chips and the dust that is surely being created on the other side of that thin door. A second attempt at dark humor, almost a whimper. Why did the ghost buy stock in the abandoned motel? Because he heard the property value was to die for. You stare at the door, your heart pounding a frantic counter-rhythm to the noise from within. The scratching is not random. It is purposeful. It sounds like a desperate message being carved into the wood, but there's no time to decipher it. The intensity suggests a sudden, sharp panic, perhaps triggered by the very act of you reading Elias's name and coordinates. You need to open that closet. You need the hidden object Elias left behind. It's the only way to understand what the coordinates mean, and what is about to come through that door. You scan the desk frantically, knowing there must be a second key. Elias was meticulous. He wouldn't leave a final message that couldn't be accessed. The final cynical joke, aimed at the irony of your situation. I tried to complain to the motel manager about the noise in the closet. He said, "I'm sorry, sir, but those are just the sounds of old trauma working itself out." You tear your eyes away from the violently shaking closet knob and turn back to the desk. You remember the felt lining, the place where the register was hidden, and the thickness of the drawer bottom you noticed when you first touched the drawer. The second key must be here, hidden from the fire and the subsequent decades of decay, tucked away precisely by the meticulous, paranoid Elias V. Thorne. You need to find it now, before the entity behind the door finishes carving its way through its wooden prison. The scratching is frantic, a terrifying rhythmic sandpaper of sound erupting from behind the small, dark mahogany door. It is no longer subtle. It is a violent, insistent demand for attention, loud enough to drown out the muffled rain. You can almost feel the vibration of the claws or tools against the heavy wood. And then you see it, the shadow. It's not a shadow cast by the dim, flickering light bulb, but a negation of light. A shape, much darker and denser than the room's prevailing gloom, seems to detach itself from the wall near the closet door. It is impossibly tall and unnaturally slender, a shifting silhouette that absorbs the light around it, making the air immediately adjacent to the closet seem thicker, like black syrup. It pulses faintly, drawing the eye, and moves with a slow, almost lazy deliberation toward the door, as if preparing to assist the desperate entity scratching from within. This visual apparition, the shadow entity, is a classic element of mainstream supernatural horror, often theorized to be a manifestation of pure malice, or the residual spirit of the building itself, the caretaker's silence given physical form. Its appearance confirms that the letter or the name Elias and the coordinates have triggered an active response. You stumble back again, hitting the edge of the desk. The pain is a grounding sensation, bringing you back to the immediate desperate need for the second key. The closet door is shaking slightly now, a heavy, muffled tremor accompanying the intense scritch, scritch, scritch. You turn your back on the shadow, a dangerous act, but a necessary one, forcing yourself to focus on the desk. You remember the detail, the fragile, felt lining. The lining in the central desk drawer felt oddly loose when you pulled out the letter, and then it peeled away easily to reveal the hidden register. You need to examine the rest of the drawer now, specifically the deep recesses that were protected by the felt. A piece of obscure superstition surges into your mind, the lore of the ghost key. In this tradition, when an entity or a trapped spirit is actively trying to communicate a specific physical truth, such as the location of their remains or a hidden item, they often cause a related necessary object to spontaneously manifest or appear in an unlikely yet accessible place, forcing the living observer to fulfill their final request. The key is meant to appear now, because the scratching entity behind the door is perhaps not Elias, but something that trapped him, and Elias's ghost is subtly guiding your search. You plunge your hands into the drawer, ignoring the stale smell and the loose felt. You tear away the remaining felt lining, exposing the raw, unfinished wood of the drawer bottom. You trace the edges, frantically feeling for a seam, a catch, a loose panel. The wood feels solid until you reach the deepest recess, the farthest corner from the drawer pull. There, where the dust and decay have accumulated most densely, you feel a sharp, cold edge. It's small, almost minuscule, but undeniably metal. You carefully scrape away the ancient, chalky dust with your fingernails. You pull it out. It is a tiny, tarnished copper key. Not brass, like the main door key, but copper, a soft, warm-toned metal dull with age. It's barely an inch long, delicate and precise, clearly designed for a small, specialized lock, perhaps a chest or a safe, or more likely a built-in piece of furniture. It is the second key. You hold it up to the dim light, and the metal is startlingly cold, matching the temperature of the room. You realize with a sudden, sick clarity that this key, unlike the brass one, was never meant to leave the room. You manage a shaky, dark joke, the humor thin as glass. Why did the shadow entity always stand by the locked closet? Because it was looking for a little company. And maybe a snack. You turn from the desk, clutching the tiny copper key. The tall, dark shadow near the closet has not moved, but the furious scritch, scritch, scritch is louder than ever, a sound of wood being systematically annihilated. You need to move fast. You recall the scholarly debate phrasing again. Historians still argue whether the most dangerous moment for an investigator entering a historically protected space is the moment of initial entry, the breach of security, or the moment immediately preceding the retrieval of a key artifact, the confirmation of the history's importance. Right now, with the shadow watching and the scraping entity closing in, you are firmly in the latter. This key is confirmation. You walk toward the closet door, your eyes fixed on the keyhole. You insert the tiny copper key. It slips in smoothly, perfectly. It's the right key. A final, desperate dry joke before you turn the key. What's the only thing worse than a locked closet in an abandoned motel? A locked closet that starts talking back. You grip the small key, your hand trembling slightly. You ignore the shadow, ignore the cold, and you turn the key with a soft yet definitive click. The scratching stops instantly, plunging the room back into the heavy, profound silence. The shadow near the door seems to deepen, waiting. You hear the internal mechanism of the lock release with a gentle, mechanical sigh. The closet door is now unlocked. The silence that follows the gentle click of the copper key in the closet lock is absolute, a vacuum that pulls all sound, all air, into itself. The furious, panicked scratching has ceased entirely, replaced by the heavy, patient stillness that defines room 12. The tall, dark shadow near the door has solidified, a dense, immobile column of malice observing you with a terrifying, silent focus. You feel its gaze like a physical weight on your back. You turn the brass knob slowly, easing the mahogany door open an inch. The movement is smooth, silent, without the slightest protest of old wood or rusty hinges. You peer into the black space. The closet is built deep into the wall, a simple rectangle of darkness. You expect to see something terrible, a hanging skeleton, a pile of clothes, or a mound of dust-covered artifacts. But the closet is almost perfectly empty. It's swept clean, the floor bare, the walls a simple unfinished plaster, unlike the wallpapered rest of the room. It smells of dry, cold air, the lingering scent of mothballs and nothing else. It's an empty void of non-memory. This emptiness is a deeply unsettling component of mainstream psychological horror, often referred to as the omission. The expectation of a climax, the horrific reveal, is replaced by an unsettling void, suggesting that whatever terror was here has either been removed or, far worse, was never physical in the first place. And you find yourself scanning the plaster walls, desperate for the carving, the writing, the sign of the entity that was scratching so frantically. Nothing. You push the door open fully, revealing the entire disappointing emptiness. You step inside, the small copper key still warm in your hand. The shadow outside the closet does not enter, remaining at the threshold, a silent sentinel. You run your hands along the smooth, cool plaster of the side walls. You look up at the single, dusty clothes rod. Nothing. This is the dead closet, perhaps, the one that swallowed its contents. But Elias was meticulous. He said his hidden object was in the room, accessible by the coordinates and the letter. If it's not in the front of the closet, it must be in the back. You turn your attention to the rear wall of the closet, the one that separates this room from what? The unit next door, room 13, which you noticed was slightly ajar and exposed to the elements. You press your hands against the back plaster wall. It feels solid, cold, but then your fingers catch a faint seam running vertically along the center. It's incredibly subtle, masked by layers of paint and decades of settling dust. It is not a natural construction seam, it is a panel. You immediately recall the loose felt lining in the desk drawer, the drawer that held the key. The scholarly debate phrasing comes back to you. Researchers disagree on whether the most reliable indicator of a hidden panel in a decayed structure is the visual inconsistency of the plasterwork, or the subtle textural and acoustic feedback when the wall is tapped. You don't need a tap, you found the seam. You trace the vertical seam carefully, following it down to the baseboard. At the floor level, where the seam meets the wood trim, you feel a slight, barely perceptible indent, a tiny depression that might accommodate a fingernail, or perhaps the edge of the small copper key. This leads to a dry, cynical joke. What did the wall say when I asked if it had any secrets? I'm not telling you anything. I'm just waiting to be panelized. You kneel down in the cold, dusty closet floor, aligning the tiny copper key with the indent. It works perfectly. The key, acting as a small lever, slips into the depression. You press down gently. There's a soft thunk, and the central vertical seam widens fractionally. The panel is hinged on the left, and it swings inward, not outward, revealing a narrow, hidden cavity, perhaps 6 inches wide, running the full height of the closet. The sight of the hidden space triggers a piece of obscure lore, the hole-in-the-world superstition, which claims that secret compartments in abandoned places are often not architectural tricks, but intentional voids created by the malicious forces inhabiting the structure, designed to hide the most vital information from the light. Finding of the void is a sign that you are now playing by the building's rules. Inside the small, dark void, there is only one object. It is a slim, leather-bound journal. It's small enough to fit in a coat pocket, and it radiates the same specific, unnatural cold as the room itself. You pull it out, the leather dry and smooth beneath your fingers. A final piece of dark humor, a grim observation. What do you call an abandoned motel with a secret panel and a tall, dark shadow watching you? Home. You close the small hinged panel behind you, covering the void. You step out of the empty closet, the shadow still waiting silently at the door frame. You ignore it, focused entirely on the journal in your hand. The cover is simple, dark, and embossed with a single word, pressed deep into the leather inventory. You stand in the oppressive, silent cold of room 12, clutching the slim, leather-bound journal. The word inventory embossed on the cover is both clinical and terrifying. An inventory of what? The items Elias brought with him, or an inventory of his increasing terror. You know immediately that this is the hidden object Elias left behind, the one the coordinates were meant to lead you toward. The silent shadow at the closet door remains, a static observer, ensuring you finish the transaction. You open the journal to the first page. The handwriting is instantly recognizable, the same precise, looping script from the mirror letter, only this time it is written forward, legible and direct. It's Elias V. Thorne's private record. The first 3 pages are mundane, a chilling contrast to the environment. A list of packing essentials, gas receipts, and hotel prices. The entries are short, neat, and dated. Then about halfway through the book, the tone shifts abruptly. The handwriting remains neat, but the content spirals into existential dread. The entries begin to list not objects, but psychological states. Inventory, day 7. Item 1, trust. Diminishing rapidly, not enough light for the shadows. Inventory, day 10. Item 2, silence. Absolute. Heavier than sound. Must keep track of the scratching. Inventory, day 14. Item 3, time. Unreliable. The clock runs, but the dust does not settle, trapped in a loop. This cataloging of psychological collapse is a deeply unnerving form of mainstream psychological horror. The breakdown of the narrator's grasp on reality. Filius was attempting to use the rigid structure of a ledger to contain and rationalize his growing madness, to anchor himself in logic while the room actively dissolved his perception. You flip through the pages, seeing the gradual decay of his mental state mirrored in the subject matter. The last 20 pages are filled only with single-word frantic entries, each dated a day later than the last. Waiting, cold, quiet, listening, gone, mirror. You recall a piece of obscure spiritual folklore, the record-keeper's curse. This belief holds that a person who attempts to meticulously record and catalog a supernatural or cursed event will, by the power of their intention, become intrinsically tied to the event and its location, unable to leave until the record is complete. Elias tried to be the keeper of the Blackwood's inventory, and in the end, the Blackwoods simply made an inventory of him. You manage a shaky, dark joke, running your fingers over the cold leather cover. Why did the Blackwood Motel manager keep such detailed psychological records? He believed in giving his guests a truly personalized breakdown. You search for the coordinates. They are not in the main inventory. They must be related to the letter's message. You open the journal again, searching for the final entry. You flip past the frantic single-word lists, finally reaching the last few blank pages. The scholarly debate phrasing comes to mind. Historians still argue whether the most effective method for understanding a subject's paranoia is the systematic analysis of their written record, or the psychological projection of the reader's own fears onto the text's ambiguity. With Elias, there is no ambiguity left. His fear is palpable, bleeding through the final page. The final entry is dated exactly 50 years ago, matching the date on the mirror script letter. It is the longest entry in the latter half of the book, written with a chilling, clinical precision, as if he had finally achieved a terrible clarity just before sending his final message. You begin to read. A second dry, dark joke as you absorb the mounting dread. I told the shadow entity it should write a self-help book. It said, I can't. All my advice involves a fundamental lack of light. The final entry details the moment Elias realized the Blackwood Motel wasn't simply abandoned, but waiting. He writes that the true danger of the motel is not the ghosts of the guests who vanished, but the absence of the manager who fled. The manager, in his haste, left a part of his malicious intention behind, an autonomous architectural sentience that required a constant feed of psychological energy, generated by the fear and ultimate surrender of its inhabitants. Elias realized that the motel wasn't passively haunted, it was actively hunting. He explains that the cold, the silence, and the static were all tools the building used to isolate and consume. He discovered the small panel in the closet, realizing it was the last place the manager had intended to check. He left the journal there, and then, knowing he couldn't leave, he penned the mirror script letter, giving the coordinates to an external location, a point of resistance, that he had observed from his window. The coordinates must point to the only object he was able to leave outside, a small personalized marker he placed near the exit road before the rain trapped him. The marker would contain the final key. The journal entry ends with a horrific description of the shadow entity you just saw, referring to it as the caretaker's silence. He writes that the only way to avoid becoming part of the inventory is to never look into the reflection while reading the key. For Shutton, sharp awareness of the mirror script letter still resting on the desk hits you. You know you have to put the journal down. Final piece of morbid humor. Why did Elias write his journal in a closet? Because he wanted to keep his fears close to the chest. You gently place the journal back on the desk next to the mirror script letter. You've read the final entry. The coordinates point to a marker, and the marker is the final key. But Elias's last, most crucial warning was about the reflection. You realize you haven't looked into the mirror since you used it to read the letter. But you need to look at the coordinates one more time, to commit them to memory before you leave. You must use the mirror again. You have to ignore the warning. You turn, heart pounding, toward the bathroom alcove. The final, frantic entry of Elias's journal sits on the desk, the leather cover stark against the pale paper of the mirror script letter. His last words, the warning about the reflection, echo in the profound silence of room 12. You realize the devastating simplicity of the trap. The truth is only accessible through the mirror. But the mirror is the conduit for the caretaker's silence. You have to risk the reflection to get the coordinates again. The shadow at the closet threshold has not moved. It seems to anticipate your move toward the reflective surface. You pick up the mirror script letter. The reverse writing is still an unsettling, beautiful mess of loops and coils, hiding its terrible truth. You walk slowly toward the bathroom alcove, toward the small, grime-streaked mirror above the sink. The cold deepens with every step, and the air crackles faintly with the ozone scent of high static. This necessary action approaching the known danger is the fundamental premise of mainstream survival horror. The character must violate the established rules of safety in order to achieve the necessary objective, in this case, obtaining the coordinates. You reach the sink and hold the letter up to the small, clean patch you wiped earlier. The script flips, snapping back into legible English. You force yourself to focus only on the coordinates, reading them aloud softly to commit them to auditory memory. The numbers 8-digit sequence pointing to a nearby external location are burned into your mind. But as you read the final digit, your eyes are drawn against your will to the area of the mirror around the letter, to the reflection of the room behind you. And there it is, the impossibility. The reflection is not right, it is not your own. Behind your reflected shoulder, standing in the middle of room 12, is the tall, slender, intensely dark shadow you saw near the closet door. It is perfectly silent, completely immobile, and impossibly close. In the mirror's reversed reality, it stands slightly to the left of your reflection, a column of absolute darkness that seems to actively drink the weak light from the bulb. It is the physical manifestation of Elias's warning, the caretaker's silence. This sudden, visceral manifestation of the shadow entity in the reflection is a key moment of obscure horror lore, known as the reversed witness. The belief is that entities tied to mirrored spaces will not appear in the room itself, but will only be visible in the reflection, witnessing your actions from a dimensional offset. The fact that the entity is visible confirms you have committed the psychological error Elias warned against. You have accepted the room's inverted reality. You feel a wave of intense, cold dread. Your body is frozen, unable to turn around, trapped by the knowledge that the reflection is standing just inches behind your real physical body. You force a dark, panicked joke, a desperate attempt to break the paralysis. Why did the caretaker's silence never use social media? Because he hated all the selfie reflections. The joke is silent, a thought trapped in the cold air. You realize you must move, you must break the visual loop. You slowly, deliberately lower the letter, letting the script revert to its illegible tangle. But your eyes remain glued to the mirror, watching the reflection of the tall, dark shadow. It doesn't move, it simply stands there, a patient, silent column of negative energy. You recall the scholarly debate phrasing. Researchers disagree on whether the most effective method for disrupting a psychospiritual manifestation is a deliberate act of physical defiance, e.g., breaking the mirror or the object, or a complete withdrawal of attention, starving the entity of the cognitive energy required for its presence. You choose the latter, knowing that a physical struggle here would be instantly fatal. You take a small, hesitant step back from the mirror, keeping your eyes fixed on the reflection. The shadow remains in place, its dark silhouette unmoving. As your physical body moves, the reflected shadow stays put, watching your reflection recede. It is static, anchored to a spot that is now several feet behind your current physical location. It's waiting for you to turn your back completely. A second, dry, dark joke whispered to your paralyzed reflection. What's the worst thing about an invisible stalker? They never leave a footprint for the police. You slowly back out of the bathroom alcove, never breaking eye contact with the mirror. Finally, when you are standing next to the desk, the shadow is visible far in the background of the reflection, standing right where you were just moments ago. It is guarding the mirror, the window to Elias's truth. You turn your back quickly, grabbing the leather journal and the mirror letter. The adrenaline is pumping, but you are not screaming. The room's enforced silence is working. You have the coordinates committed to memory. The marker is outside. You need to get out of room 12. The brass key you used to enter is still on the bedside table. You sprint to the table, snatch the key, and rush to the main door. You insert the key into the lock, turning it with frantic urgency. It catches, but it does not turn. You try again, forcing the key, but the mechanism is seized. You are locked in. The brass key, you realize, was an invitation, not a passkey. The final piece of dark humor, a laugh of pure, desperate resignation. Why did the door refuse to open for the trapped guest? Because it said, "I'm sorry, your key has expired, along with your chances of survival." You pound your fist on the solid mahogany door, but the sound is swallowed by the room's silence. The shadow, still visible in the distance in the mirror, has not moved. But you are not alone. Something is about to happen, something final. You pound on the door again, a desperate, futile gesture. The noise is absorbed instantly, muffled to a dull thud, a whisper in the vast, consuming silence of room 12. You are trapped, the key inert in your hand, a cruel, final joke. The caretaker's silence remains frozen in the mirror's reflection, a watchful sentinel near the bathroom alcove. Your eyes dart frantically between the locked door and the reflection of the unmoving, impossibly tall shadow. The cold is now a physical pain, sharp and deep in your chest, making every breath a shallow, ozone-scented gasp. The sheer terror of being locked in the specific frozen box is profound. You try the handle one last time, pulling and rattling the door, but it is sealed, immovable. You remember Elias's final chilling line. They've moved the door again. I am room 12 now. The door is not locked, it has simply ceased to be an exit. It is now part of the wall, another piece of the structure designed to contain. This moment of realization is the crux of mainstream folk horror. The understanding that the location itself is the predator, not just the container of the horror. The motel is actively adapting, changing its geometry to keep its newest guest. You turn away from the door, defeated. You move back toward the desk, where the journal and the mirror script letter lie open. The coordinates are burned into your mind, pointing to a marker you can't reach. A piece of obscure architectural lore pops into your mind, the legend of the liminal shift. This belief suggests that a door's function can be spiritually altered by concentrated trauma, becoming a temporary, non-physical boundary. The only way to reverse the shift is to introduce an object from outside the structure's influence, something that challenges its self-contained reality. The marker Elias left outside with its unknown final key is the only way to challenge the liminal shift. You try a joke, a tired, internal shrug of acceptance. Why did the abandoned motel's cleaning staff quit? Because they couldn't handle the ghostly shift changes. You stand over the desk, pulling the journal closer. You read Elias's final warning about the reflection again, the words losing none of their potency. You are staring at the truth of your situation. You are the subject of the caretaker's inventory. You feel a sudden, sharp, almost painful pressure on the back of your head, like an intense headache or a static charge gathering just behind your skull. You instinctively look over your shoulder, but there is nothing but the peeling wallpaper in the dust-covered bed. The shadow remains in the mirror. The headache intensifies, a focused, electric spike of pure pain. You realize the shadow in the mirror is not just watching you, it is focusing its energy, concentrating on your current position. The scholarly debate phrasing provides a momentary distraction. Researchers disagree on whether the human experience of intense, localized physical pain during paranormal encounters is a psychosomatic reaction to extreme fear, or the direct result of energy transfer necessary for the entity's attempted physical manifestation. Either way, you are currently in extreme pain. You stumble, clutching the back of your head. You hear a sound now, not the scratching, but a low, vibrating hum emanating from the ceiling directly above the single, flickering light bulb. It's the sound of overloaded electricity, or perhaps the humming of the caretaker's energy collection. A second dry, dark joke forced through clenched teeth. I tried to have a rational conversation with the shadow behind me, but I found the discussion lacked a certain dimension. The flickering light bulb above your head, the one that has been the singular, sickly yellow source of illumination in room 12, suddenly overloads. The humming stops, replaced by a high-pitched, brittle ping of glass cracking, followed by a soft, muted pop. The light explodes. It's not a violent, shattering explosion, but a quiet, almost apologetic implosion of glass and filament. The light dies completely, plunging room 12 into absolute, total, suffocating darkness. The darkness is not just the absence of light. It is a profound, active presence that immediately engulfs you. It's colder than the air, denser than the air. It's the color of the black wax seal, the color of the shadow, and it presses against your eyes, against your skin. You drop the journal and the letter. You can hear them hit the carpet with a soft thud. The silence is back, 1,000 times heavier, now that the last thread of light is gone. You stand there, lost in the immediate, blinding dark, your heart hammering against your ribs. You cannot see the door, the desk, or the shadow in the mirror. You are utterly, physically alone in the dark, and then you hear it. It's coming from the main door, the one you just tried and failed to open. A knock, not frantic, not a crash, not a scratched. It is a slow, deliberate series of knocks. Knock, long pause. Knock, longer pause. Knock. It is slow, it is patient, it is 3 knocks. The rhythm of an arrival, or perhaps the final tally. Final piece of dark humor, a thought lost in the immediate terror. What do you call a motel with no lights and a terrifyingly patient visitor at the door? The final destination. You stand frozen in the darkness, listening to the deliberate heavy silence after the 3rd knock. The entity that was in the reflection is now at the door, and you know with the absolute certainty of the loss that it is not Elias. The darkness is absolute. It is a physical weight pressing on your consciousness. A thick, suffocating velvet that has swallowed the last vestiges of the room's existence. You stand paralyzed, hands outstretched uselessly, the memory of the exploded light bulb and the final deliberate 3 knocks echoing in the vacuum of the silence. The fear is no longer adrenaline, it's a paralyzing cold that seems to stop the flow of blood. The caretaker's silence is not just watching you from the reflection now, it is standing on the other side of the door, waiting for you to make a sound, waiting for you to move. The liminal shift is complete. You force yourself to take a breath, but the air is thin, saturated with ozone and the metallic tang of old iron. You can hear nothing but the frantic pulse in your own ears. This sequence, the final light dying, the sound of the deliberate knock, is a common element of mainstream ghost narratives, often referred to as the vigil, where the entity announces its presence and waits for the trapped victim's ultimate surrender. You close your eyes, knowing it makes no difference, and try to visualize the room. The coordinates, the journal, the mirror script letter, all useless now in the blackness. The coordinates are etched in your memory, but how do you act on them from a sealed box? You take one slow, tentative step toward the desk, feeling the matted carpet beneath your feet. You need to find the journal and the letter again to hold something tangible from the world Elias left behind. Then comes the second set of knocks. Knock. 2 knocks this time, closer together. The rhythm is changing, becoming slightly more insistent, less ceremonial. The pause afterward is shorter, too. It's less of a tally and more of a demand. A piece of obscure horror lore comes to mind. The countdown of courtesy. In certain demonic traditions, an entity will initiate contact with a specific number of knocks, often 3, representing a mockery of the Holy Trinity, and then decrease the number with each subsequent set, shortening the time between them. The countdown is a measure of the entity's diminishing patience, signifying the final moments before it ceases to knock and simply enters. You drop to your knees, desperately sweeping your hands over the carpet, searching for the smooth leather of the journal or the rough paper of the letter. Your fingers brush against something cold and rough, the journal. You clutch it to your chest. You think of the scholarly debate phrasing. Researchers disagree on whether the human tendency to anthropomorphize non-physical threats, giving the knocks a patience level, is an evolutionary coping mechanism to make the horror quantifiable, or if the entities themselves intentionally modify their behavior to fit the human psychological framework of escalating threat. Either way, you know you are running out of time. You manage a choked, dark joke, a silent scream of wit into the void. Why did the monster stop knocking after the final one? Because he decided to just drop by unannounced. You hold the journal, the way to small comfort. Elias's final entry. The coordinates. You close your eyes again, focusing all your mental energy on the 8 digits. You realize that Elias didn't intend for the coordinates to be used after you were locked in. He intended them to be used while you still had agency. They point to a physical location outside the motel. But wait, Elias wrote that the paper itself is the key, the mirror script letter, the reverse message. You scramble to find the letter, sweeping your hands in wider arcs. Your fingers brush against something stiff and dry, the letter. You pull it close. The third set of knocks. Knock. One single, heavy, absolute final knock. The pause is non-existent. It's immediate, final, and it vibrates through the carpet, through your bones. The countdown is complete. The door remains closed, but you know the knock was a formality. You clutch the letter and the journal. The paper itself is the key. You realize that the coordinates you memorized were only the first half of the key. Elias, the meticulous, paranoid writer, would never leave such vital information unsecured. You need the second half. You can't see, but you can feel the letter. You turn it over, holding it up to your face, trying to feel the paper texture. And you realize with a sudden devastating clarity that Elias left his final message not in the reflection, but on the letter itself. The coordinates were one line. The second half must be written in the spaces between the reverse written words, visible only as an outline. You bring the paper close to your face. You run your fingers over the smooth texture, tracing the faint impression of the heavy black ink. You don't need light. You don't need the mirror. You need touch. Your fingers trace the indentations between the flowing, backward words. And there it is, written in a microscopic, blind-written script, an indentation pressed so lightly it never cut the paper, are a final 4 digits. The second half of the coordinates, completing a 12-digit sequence. A final, desperate, dry joke. As the cold reaches its peak, I tried to tell the caretaker's silence a joke, but he said, I don't get it. It seems to be lacking depth. The combination is complete. You have the full coordinates to the hidden marker outside. You feel a presence in the room now. Not just the cold, but a subtle, rising pressure on your shoulders, the feeling of something heavy and incredibly tall leaning over you. The air in front of your face is instantly frigid, stealing your breath. The shadow is in the room. You drop the letter in the journal, realizing you can no longer outrun the caretaker's silence. You have the coordinates. That is enough. You close your eyes one last time, accepting the darkness. The cold lingers, but the pressure on your shoulders begins to soften. The absolute blackness of room 12, that total absence of light, slowly begins to recede, yielding to the faintest, gentlest gray. It's the pre-dawn light, or perhaps just the memory of light, returning to the periphery of your vision. The violent fear drains away, leaving only a deep, profound exhaustion. You feel the rough texture of the carpet beneath your hands, grounding you back into the reality of the room, or at least the memory of the room. The faint, rhythmic sound of the distant rain returns, no longer muffled, but a soft, steady white noise, a comforting pulse in the dark. The terror has passed, like a wave pulling back from the shore, leaving behind only the cold, wet sand of uncertainty. You reach out, blindly, and your hand falls on the smooth, dark wood of the desk. You remember the coordinates. You remember Elias's warning. You remember the 3 knocks. It's over now. The caretaker's silence is gone, or perhaps it has simply resumed its patient, internal waiting. You are still in room 12, but the threat has subsided, leaving you alone with the silence and the cold. You are tired, so very tired. The sheer, overwhelming length of this night has taken its toll, and you realize you have navigated a history that was not yours to begin with. The cold eases from your chest, replaced by the faint, slow-returning warmth of your own body heat. You lean your head against the cool, dark wood of the desk, letting the fatigue wash over you. The fear is a distant hum, a low, fading note in the song of the night. You are safe now for the moment. The light, the gentle, growing light of the pre-dawn is all you need. You close your eyes, letting the sound of the rain carry you down, away from the cold floor and the dark shadow. Let the silence of the Blackwood Motel become the silence of your own mind. It is time to let go of the keys, the letters, and the coordinates. They are just stories now. Just whispers in the dark. You can rest. It is quiet. It is cold, but it is quiet.